David, thanks for doing this. One of the fun things about S56 is that there are like little bits and pieces that other attorneys have jurisdiction over. And I think when we were first talking about the bill and talking about the venture capital and making sure money went where it wanted it to go and all of those things, I was thinking a lot about our cannabis legislation and how we sort of put in statute a need to communicate like full ownership structures. And so I asked David to come in and tell us a little bit about how that all works.
Okay, David Hall, legislative counsel, I think nominally is S56 I'm testifying on. You're asking me about what do we do in the cannabis legislation as far as disclosing ownership structures?
And how might that translate to S56?
In the end, if I recall correctly, what you wanted was, and this is a bit that Commerce and this committee, I believe, both worked on, was a slate of, I believe they do, it was structured to say that the board shall adopt rules too. And part of that package was for applicants to disclose both their ownership structures, basically their affiliated ownership structures, and also then their financial or their financier structures. Good.
That was so quick. What?
And anybody who had more than a 5% ownership stake therein.
Well, yes, let's.
Okay.
That's where so when I say ownership structure, yes, there was a threshold. What do we decide? What does it mean to own? What does it mean to control? What does it mean to be affiliated with? So those terms are actually all spelled out in the definitions of that legislation. And you raise a good point. I actually don't remember if it was 5 or 10%, but basically it's if you had an equity, so an ownership interest in, or you had by some other means the ability to control the activities of, so maybe you had it through a contract, or maybe you had it through some sort of subsidiary, which actually was the one that had the actual ownership. You, in that case, had what's called a beneficial ownership. But the bottom line is, if you had the authority to direct the business of or some sort of ownership interest in one of these applicants, then you had to disclose that. And again, it wasn't just the business that was the applicant, but it was also businesses with which the applicant was under common ownership or control. So we're talking about parent subsidiary relationships, but also sibling relationships. So if there was a parent that was up here and then they formed a subsidiary and there were other companies, we really want to know who's in the web. Mm-hmm. And that way, somebody doesn't come in with applicant ABC LLC and they say, oh, we're a good small Vermont local business, blah, blah, blah. But actually 95% of our equity is owned by Philip Morris. It's not that they can't do it. It's just that we want to know it. Because we can't not have people participate in our market. That's unconstitutional. But we can at least know who is pulling the strings of these businesses, who has the financial interest in them. The other part of that, which may be less probably an issue in the childcare space, is we were concerned about illegal financing. We were worried about illicit drug activity and basically, an otherwise law-abiding business, some LLC, actually being financed by illegal interests, whether drug or crime or whatever. So we also required the same disclosure for what we defined as a financier. So the person who provided financial backing of a certain percentage in those businesses or their affiliates. Again, I don't think you're too worried about drug cartels opening up childcare centers, but maybe you are. I don't know. So, whether or not you want to know the financing, that's another bit. you can, this was pegged to rules and it was part of the application process. So there are different times this would come into play. I understand from conversations with Katie that there are licensed childcare providers and registered providers. So one way to do this is that anybody who wants to operate in this state has to disclose that information as part of their approval for licensure or registration. Or you could just say across the board, any childcare provider shall give this information to DCF. Or you could say anybody who wants to receive public money needs to be giving this information. And that way they can opt out. They can opt out of either performing the business, they can opt out of licensure or registration, or they could opt out on receiving public financing. It'd be up to them. Or again, you could just have an across the board requirement that says everybody who provides childcare services shall report this. So I know that there are different considerations. I mean, look, in the cannabis space, it was, size of the business, equal opportunity for participation in a limited market, et cetera. Here, concerns might be more geared toward, the one person that takes care of two kids in their house. Do they really need to tell you that they're a sole proprietorship and that, or are you more worried about conglomerates, private equity firms, chains, big businesses, and wanting to know, do we need to get that information from them?
I'm worried about the latter one, that is to say consortiums of folks who have entered the market for profitability reasons. And you mentioned that the parallel situation in the cannabis case was worrisome because of the limited number of licenses that were being granted. And I agree with you. That was my baptism to that subject last term in government ops. I would worry because even though there's no formal restriction on the number of registrants or certificate license-based daycare, they are very much local market connected. People who could control the Chittenden County capacity would have a very important advantage, let me put it that way, in the balance sheet sense, because people from Barry are not going to hire childcare 50 miles away in Chittenden County. So it's very much a legal market. We'll have a natural limit in terms of number of participants, even if it doesn't have a licensure limit.
So I think, David, the example that you gave of just someone watching two kids in their home, that might be registered but not licensed. Likely someone would receive licensing for those two people. I don't know if that's the point they were trying to make. But
It's that the point I was making is that is where, at what point, what is the trigger, what is the hook for requiring these disclosures? And is it a function of your status with the state? Is it a function of size? Is it a function of scale? What's the, from whom do you require this information and at what point, on what basis?
I think the accepting public money is a reasonable threshold for requiring some part of disclosure. And you can elect to opt in or not, and that we would sort of have additional level of oversight because they're public dollars.
Sure. And you could, and you can limit how much public support you want to give to different classes of applicants. That's perfectly legal. So, but that's up to you. Those are obviously policy questions that sticking.
any other questions on this one for you?
Between Peter and Catherine, pretty well covered, I think.
With that, do you want to talk about SB 100, David?
Sure.
Oh, do you have something? We can. Do you have something about S56 for Mr. Sims? Representative Anthony does it. So
Let me dive in. I can't resist. Again, I think when one makes an application to be licensed or registered, the level of financial interest of other people is of public import. And I would just think you would pick the trigger of, okay, who is it who has a financial interest other than the applicant named in the registration request, and pick a threshold, 5, 10%, whatever.
There's like licensed and registered are actually technical terms in childcare land. And
Yes, they
I think
are.
registered is something that could stay. We don't have to really think about it.
Okay, then it's licensed.
Okay.
Yep.
Or it could be receiving CCFAP, which is sort of another nexus, so. Representative Taylor.
If you're a private school and you're getting state funds, do we require the private school to say where all its financing comes from?
I have no idea,
And I'm not,
but we could ask Beth when she comes in.
I'm not as hung up on the idea of somebody making a profit, or I'm not sure where all this is coming from. I understand it with the cannabis. But I
Understand
don't,
with what?
with the cannabis,
Okay.
but I don't understand it with daycare at this point, Laura.
I've heard from a number of people are you going to speak to that concern? Or are you gonna-
I would say that with an independent school in Vermont, when to be approved to accept public tuition, they have to demonstrate financial viability to the AOE that does the approval process.
Liability.
Yeah, that they're stable, financially stable.
Okay. Seems reasonable.
So I think it's the idea that we are making really drastic changes to a market because it requires it. And I think I've heard concerns from a lot of people that in doing that, by putting sort of, and we want to make sure that that money isn't sort of skimmed off, but in fact is going to the very specific places that we are asking it to go to. And so putting in place a number of safeguards. So there's the safeguards that we talked about this morning with Damien around wages. There's making sure that, CCFAP for families is working the way we want it to. But this is just sort of another safeguard to ensure that the market, which we are interfering in because there's a complete market failure, and perhaps there shouldn't be a market, has just sort of full eyes on it, given all of the money, public money we're putting in.
So-
It's up to you, I don't.
I mean, I think some of the concern, right, is people just like gut the money and not pay people adequate wages, right? Like, is it possible that the market would just solve for that? Because if you're not paying good wages, you might not be able to recruit people, and the center next to you who has access to better resources would be able to adequately compensate, and there hopefully will be a lot more choice in the marketplace, and parents will get high quality care.
Maybe. I think there's a lot of places that doesn't work.
I think the market solves all of the problems except for one. And I don't think the market,
Current one or the future one?
think both. I don't think that the market necessarily forces additional public monies that are put into the system towards parents to make it more affordable. I don't think those dollars necessarily flow to that group of people, but I think it does flow to employees, and I think it does flow to better facilities and things like that. But I don't think it gets into parents' pockets necessarily. It might, but not necessarily.
Are you saying that our current childcare program does not offset parents' costs right now?
I'm sorry, for
Expansion?
the people that pay based on the market and what people can pay without subsidy, I think I think those people, that's what the market is, for the people that aren't getting subsidy. I don't think if you put more subsidy money into the system, that it necessarily helps those people out.
So sorry, just read back what you're saying, if we put more money into the system.
It doesn't necessarily make
reduce
it,
the costs and challenges.
It doesn't make it-
Who aren't income eligible for subsidy.
it doesn't necessarily make it more affordable for parents.
For parents who aren't eligible for subsidies.
We're definitely them. Yeah. And
But are
maybe
you
not-
including parents who are eligible for subsidies?
I mean, they can charge more than the CCFAP rate. Centers can. They want to continue to capture same amounts of money from the parents of those kids.
So in a marketplace, right, if one center was charging a lot more on top of the CCFAP subsidy and down the street there was another center that wasn't, parents would have a
Well-
choice and you might have trouble.
There might if they decide to compete that way, but they might not. They might put it all into employees, they might put it all into the building. They don't, there's nothing that, they clearly know what people can pay right now. Yeah,
Okay, this seems like
so, I don't know. But I
an
think,
important conversation to have and not one in the context of what we're doing with David. And
Can I just
Yes.
add one? I think childcare centers are very attuned to the stresses that families are under. And again, the childcare center my kids are at is a nonprofit and has to raise philanthropic dollars to close the gap between covering the not full cost of care and charging families. Like, I guess I don't feel like we're in a situation where childcare centers are trying to I don't know.
I don't say, they know what parents can pay. They know what parents can afford.
And I think the problem is it doesn't line up with what our kids and our
It
employees.
doesn't line up with what their costs are, right? Yeah, I'm right about that.
Just, there's one logic. If the universe is populated by nonprofits, there's a different, I think, logic set of inquiry that one has to go on if private equity groups are running that industry. Those are really two different discussions, two dynamics. The incentives are different. And I think one has to account for both possibilities. That's where I am.
I think that line's getting blurred every day.
I think some of this, there's some good questions for Katie in this too, pieces that I want to clarify about the way things are capped in the legislation, the way maybe we could cap things in the legislation. Do we have anything more on S56 before we do a pretty hard pivot? David, that's 100. You talk us through your sections of that bill.
I can.
Thanks. And then we're gonna bell it in another day to talk about your sections.
Okay.
And bleachers, read for that.
Sure.
Saoirse?
Trying to figure out what I should be sharing. The version as it's come out of House General, I assume.
I think that works.
David, I sent the Zoom link a few minutes ago.
I saw it, Source AI. Thank
Okay.
you.
Mhm.
Let's see. Where do we start?
They're still working on this bill, so we're looking at draft of bill.
We're looking at the parts that House General we worked on. We're still working on sections of the Ellen. And most of our jurisdiction over 100 is fines, fees, and places where, because of policy changes, fee revenue might be decreased slightly. It's not a big lift from this committee's perspective.
So there are, David Hall Legislative Council now on S-100. There are, I believe they are 26, 27, 28, and 29 are actually Damien's sections.
Oh, I forgot about it.
So I don't know if that is of, those are of any interest to you, but if they are, you'll want to hear from him. Mine start on the bottom of 40 in section 30. And are we thinking like just, this is 22 pages worth of stuff. Do you just want a couple of sentences on each? Okay. So section, and most of my stuff just spends a whole lot of money. I think it's like $116 million maybe of general fund appropriations. So section 30 is 2.5 million to AHS for eviction rescue, funding and programming for the benefit of tenants and landlords, including rental arrears for non-payment of rent, if it will preserve a tenancy. There's further work happening on the specifics of this in the context of H391, which may or may not meet its fate in this bill down the road, but this right now is just this one paragraph and this one appropriation. Home share is $200,000 to DHCD to expand home sharing opportunities throughout the state. Section 32 is, it's actually H213 as you passed it. That's the first part of it. That is a study on mobile homes, mobile home park infrastructure and needs, where things stand, where they're going. Again, as you passed it in 213, the Senate's version of that was a sort of a less comprehensive study package. And then subsection H is a $500,000 appropriation to DHCD for investments in mobile homes, repairs, improvements, transitioning, park infrastructure, legal and technical assistance. Let's see, section 33 amends the eligibility for the first generation home buyer program that VHFA runs. It expands the eligibility slightly so that it applies to as long as either, if there were a pair of home buyers, as long as either of them can check the box, they self-attest that either their parent or legal guardian didn't have an ownership interest in property during their lifetime, or the new PCA or CMB, they lost ownership of a home due to foreclosure, short sale, or deed in lieu of foreclosure and haven't owned a home since that loss. So you could have had an interest, but then you lost it. And that's the big change there. Or the current law, you've been in foster care. So that's the one change to the program itself. And then there's an additional $2 million to VHFA for more first generation homebuyer grants. That number came from the Senate, 1 million. House Generals recommended doubling that. We'll see what happens with all of this money in approps. So the middle income home ownership development program, you all probably know as the missing middle home ownership development pilot program. So that was supposed to be it was a pilot to see how it worked. Apparently it's worked well. So 35 and 36 together 35 repeals the pilot status, 36 codifies the program. It is largely otherwise identical except for two respects. The percentage of AMI that qualifies for the income eligible buyer is increased to 150. And there are various provisions later about the design and implementation of this program that seek to expand its geographic and demographic reach, particularly to rural parts of the state. So things like has a municipality already received the grant? What is the need in the municipality in that geography? What's the geographic distribution and community size of the recipients, et cetera? So it's really intended to try to make sure all parts of the state receive equal opportunity to participate. This is the developer subsidized cost for home buyers, right? For home ownership homes. And that's $20 million of VHFA for that one. The next one is the other side of that. It's for rental housing. It's a new program of VHFA. It's a revolving loan program where VHFA is going to be the lender for subsidized loans for the affordability component of rental housing projects. So it could be a straight affordable rental housing, but it could also be a mixed. So there's market rate for part, and then the affordable part VHFA would finance. There are caps on the amount of the loans that VHFA can issue, 35% total or a per unit amount based on the affordability of the unit. It is intended to revolve so that when they pay the loan back, VHFA can continue to make these investments. There is a limit you'll see in 7 here that they maintain the affordability covenants while the loan is out, basically, or a minimum of it's a longer of 7 years or full repayment of the loan plus 3 years. And during that time, there is a cap on the annual increase in rent of 3% per year.
Is the covenant, David, for the whole fee or just for the structure?
It's for each unit, so.
The unit,
Yep,
so.
right.
Okay. But if it's a single family, that's where I guess, or is it not?
It has to be 2 or
it's all
more
congregate.
units. But I could be, let me make sure of that. 2 or more,
The housing units, okay, so it is the unit.
at least a duplex, and it is
Gotcha.
per unit.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Damien, do you have to be 403?
I do. Just checking in with the committee assistant to see how they're doing.
Okay. How would you feel, David, if we pushed you aside for a moment? And then got back to you since we got you both here?
Nothing personal, David, just.
Is it? I would find it all. Or,
So let's keep it going for a minute while Damien's
Okay.
back this.
all right. Or I could just be done.
Representative Maddox.
I just have one quick question. Does senior housing fit into this at all? Would it work
I
for
mean, only to the extent it's also affordable.
So senior,
There's not like a separate age component to it. It's just the affordability that you do get some bonuses, but I don't think that senior housing is one of them. So if it were an employer capitalized grant, if you had something from a municipal regional housing fund or a fiscal recovery fund, if it was a low income tax credit eligible, or if it was small in scale and provide infill development. So at least theoretically possible, there could be some overlap in that Venn diagram, but as such, independently, senior housing doesn't otherwise on its own factor into it.
but it would be eligible for the program?
Yeah.
Senior?
Yep, absolutely.
Even though it's restricted to 55 and older?
I believe so, as long as it's affordable, or it has an affordability component. It doesn't have to be all affordable.
You could have like a larger project that the RLF is only paying for like some of the units, so maybe some of the units are seniors.
And that's all that it pays for.
Yeah. As you're going through, is it possible for you to like flag which portions of this bill align with the budget as passed by House or Senate and which ones are at odds?
Well, the Senate budget, that just passed, so it's not possible for me personally. I'm sorry, I don't have that. That's a JFO question at this stage.
They are coming, but I don't know if they're prepared to answer that question either.
Sorry.
I feel like there are a lot of really big programs in here.
3:30, so we're running behind downstairs.
Fantastic.
I'll be done by then, no problem. This program does have basically the exact same language as far as design, implementation, outreach. It is also a $20 million appropriation to VHFA. So that's a good one. So the next to come is VHIP. And, you know, basically there's two changes here, three maybe. One is to clarify or to expand the scope of its application to say that no unit in the program can be used for a short-term rental as long as it's participating in the program. That had previously only been applicable to ADUs. But B, eligible rental housing units, there's an expansion in the scope of the program here. Whereas formerly it was only available to bring an offline unit online and bring it up to code or to create a new ADU. Now it would allow the creation of a newly created unit within an existing structure, a newly created structure that is a single unit, or a newly created unit within a newly created structure that contains 5 or fewer units. So, obviously that's broader. That's going to allow the creation, not just of renovation of existing, but also more creation of more types of new units up to a cap of 5.
Did that get added by House General or previously in the journey?
This was actually added by the Senate, and then after testimony, the General Committee kept it. They expanded on this language in B in general, that what they would need to make sure you prohibit the permanent involuntary displacement of tenants while the renovation is happening. They would provide for the temporary relocation of tenants while it's happening and ensure that the landlord complies with all the affordability requirements in the program. So that last bit and it sort of dovetails with the one other change, which is the requirements will be across the board applicable to all types of units. If you get a grant, same kinds of requirements. You get a loan, same kinds of requirements. Doesn't matter if it's existing, if it's new, you have to do the 5-year grant, first priority to family exiting homelessness or relocation of refugees. Or if it's a loan, it has to be accept subsidies or meet the FMR, fair market rent value, for the time it's in the program.
Representative Adams?
So you have so there's new units and there's also revamping old units. If you have a project that incorporates an existing structure, would that be, say you have 5-unit building,
Yep.
and you have a 15-unit project. So it'd be adding on 10 units. Would the 5 existing fall under renovation? And then could you do 5, hit the cap of newly constructed? So you then have like 10 units between the two groups, one for rehab, one for newly created.
I think it's at least possible.
And then 5 other ones that are just.
Yeah. It's a per unit, and there is an owner match, obviously, and there's a cap on the number of bedrooms. So if it's 2 or fewer, it's 30,000. If it's more, it's 50. But I would, I think you could at least apply for, a per unit subsidy for each of those units up to 5 new. And who knows, maybe you could do even more for existing. There's no real cap on the existing.
Oh, there isn't? Oh, I thought it was 5 for existing. Okay.
Not in the statute, at least.
But the thou shalt not be short-term rental applies to all categories under this bill.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And then that's, let's see, that's I think that's $20 million also to DHCD for VHIP. And then the last piece I have is 42, and that is a $50 million appropriation to VHCB to create all kinds of housing. That's it.
To create all kinds of what?
Housing.
Thank you. So context for committee, sort of, we're doing this slightly awkward thing to get context for the bill. And then once we have possession of the bill, we're really just going to focus on, like Ellen's going to walk us through the points where JFO thinks it's going to be an impact and we have jurisdiction. It's not. So this is sort of us getting our big picture context, and then we're gonna, once we have a bill, in order to move in a timely fashion, we'll like focus in deeper on the pieces where it's sort of very specific to ways and means.
That's true.
When do we get the bill?
I don't know. Thank you, David.
Sure. Is there anything else? We did 56, we did 100, doing all the things. That's it?
We can like look at, and like find
Sure, you
something
did
else
that.
for you, but I feel like that's it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, let me know when you think of something else.
I will.
See you soon.
Nice spending this time with you. Damian, thank you for hopping on up here. Hope you appreciate the staircase.
I always appreciate the exercise. So I have to say, having my primary committees move downstairs has not been as good for my health as having to run up here 6 times a day. So,
See what we can do to help you out.
yeah, I'm thinking of asking Abby if I can switch roles with her. I'm kidding. Tax law is difficult. Let's just leave it at that.
Who said so?
So let me pull up the amendment that you're considering here and share my screen. And excuse me, I'm just going to take this down to the right section. I'm assuming you need just a quick walk through my sections, or did you have particular questions for me?
Nope, we just want to understand the context of the
Okay.
bill from all 12 attorneys who worked on it. Representative Maslin, do you have something?
So much just thumbs up for all 12, that's like your comment from this morning, that
Yes.
space-time, continue.
Really, I think I'm going to get rigorous over the next few weeks.
Oh, good.
I appreciate everyone very much.
Awesome, I can't wait.
Did you just say space-time continuum?
That's what I
This
was
morning.
Wow, that's a particularly nerdy reference. But
I've been well called out on it. Thank you, Damian.
I appreciate it, but anyway.
You're Jackie?
We are alive.
Yes. I grew up as a child of the next generation, so
Good.
yeah. So that was a weekly viewing event in my household.
All turned out well,
Thank you for saying so.
I appreciate that.
I'm going to tell my dad we said that.
So anyway, I'm gonna attack this here and try to steer away from that.
Why?
Because otherwise I'll just make bad puns and you guys will realize what a poor sense of humor I have. So section 26, what this section does is it gets into the definitions of public building for the purposes of the fire and building safety codes. And what we've had historically is a little bit of ambiguity in the statute, and this seeks to clarify the existing practice. So in general, a public building includes any building in which people rent accommodations, whether that's an overnight accommodation like a motel or an Airbnb, or for a longer term like an apartment. However, we've excluded owner-occupied single-family residences unless used for another purpose covered by the public building statute. So for example, an owner-occupied single-family residence where the owner rents out rooms as a boarding house would qualify as a public building where you need to comply with the fire code for public buildings. The question was, what about accessory dwelling units? So previously, we had exempted single-family residences with an accessory dwelling unit. However, the the Division of Fire Safety has always interpreted it that if the accessory dwelling unit is rented out as an apartment, it is considered a public building and it's subject to any requirements for building and fire safety. And so this reflects that existing practice at the division. It is not a new requirement being put out there. It's reflecting the existing practice, which was not clear on the face of the statute, but the division had interpreted the statute to provide coverage there. So that's all this does. Questions on that? Okay. Oh, there's a question.
So if you're a single owner occupied family residence who rents it out overnight or long-term, you are a public building?
Yes.
So you're sprinkling, you're,
Well, so your requirements are going to depend on the size of the building and exactly how it's used. So not all public buildings are subject to the same requirements. There are differences depending on, for example, whether the residential unit is on the ground floor, how many floors are in the building, means of egress, et cetera, size of the building, and particular uses. So for example, if I'm using my owner occupied single family residence to also operate a manufacturing business in which I'm doing welding, I'd be subject to different requirements than an owner occupied single family residence that rents out the attached in-law apartment as an Airbnb. So
fire marshals.
in there's a breakdown on the Division of Fire Safety's webpage as to what requirements you're subject to, and when you need to get permits or licenses. And so, for example, the biggest one is going to be relate to, for example, smoke detectors. Rental units, they need to be in the bedrooms as well as in the proximity to the bedrooms and on every floor. In an owner-occupied single-family residence that's built before 1990, if I'm getting my dates right, they just need to be in proximity to the bedrooms. So in my old house, we just have one at the top of the stairs. But if we were renting the house out, we'd have to install interconnected fire alarms in all the bedrooms. So
Rented overnight means like once, if you rent it overnight.
there is no minimum. I checked with the division on this question in the last couple of weeks because it came up. And this includes, so for example, you have your single family house and you head south in the winter to Arizona and you rent it out to a legislature. When they come to Montpelier for 5 months, you are technically renting it out. And so you have to check to see if you're subject to any regulations under the fire code. As a practical matter, enforcing this is always a question. But generally it'll come up when you go to seek say to do an addition to that house, you may need to get an additional permit or an additional inspection. And it's also going to depend on the type of municipality you're in. So if you're in a larger municipality, your municipality may do the inspections. If you're in a smaller municipality, you may have the Division of Fire Safety sending a state inspector. So as you can see, the simple piece is when you're a public building or not. The more complicated piece is what's going to happen. And a lot of it's going to be determined by how you use it and what kind of municipality you're in, whether the municipality is taken on some of the inspection authority, like the larger municipalities like Montpelier or Burlington have done. Other questions?
It seems odd to me that there are some rules if you live in it yourself and other rules if you rent it.
So I don't think I can comment on whether it's odd or not, but it is a historic, it does have some history in the building. There have been questions about, for example, since my residence is owner occupied, I can do electrical work in my residence without getting a licensed electrician. Now, there definitely needs to be a judgment call made there, but I can tell you that from having looked at some of the electrical work in my residence, it wasn't done by a licensed electrician. So 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 we do have exceptions like that. There are other things in the state where we've required licenses, but we've provided these exclusions to enable people to maintain their houses at a lower cost, whether that's advisable or not. And I can't, weigh in on the advisability of that, but we've provided some exceptions to some of these rules. And the same thing with, for example, the smoke detectors. The best practice would probably be to update the systems in my house. So I have an interconnected system with a smoke detector in every single room that will let us know when the smoke detector in the basement's going off. That's not required under the law, and it's also would be extremely difficult to enforce. In general terms, for most municipalities, if you're doing minor renovation work, there's not a lot of an inspection that you have to go through. It's only when you start doing major work that you get into the inspections. So, and it's really a bigger policy question as to sort of where we're drawing the lines and requiring people to have more oversight on the work or requiring them to hire someone who's licensed to perform the work.
Onwards, thank you.
Okay. I do love talking about building codes, so I don't know a great deal about the specifics, but it's an interesting area. So the second piece here appropriates money and authorizes a new position at the Human Rights Commission. So this would be a new full-time litigator. The Human Rights Commission has been understaffed historically, and this was something they requested to allow them to handle their caseload, particularly since there were concerns expressed about ability to enforce the fair housing laws. That's why fair housing laws are singled out on line 13. But this litigator would litigate cases of all kinds under their jurisdiction. And then it just provides $150,000 for salary and benefits and other expenses. Okay. The next section is updating a criminal penalty in the Fair Housing and Public Accommodations Act, which was set at $1,000 when it was enacted in, I think, 1987. It has not been updated since. This updates it to $10,000, which is the same as the civil penalty that the Human Rights Commission can seek. As a practical matter, this criminal penalty has not been used in anyone's recollection, but it is available if the case were referred to the state's attorney's office. The Human Rights Commission itself can't seek criminal penalties, and they typically try to resolve things through an assurance of discontinuance or some other settlement without going to litigation if they can manage to.
What's the violation?
So the violation here is a violation of the Fair Housing and Public Accommodations Act. So discriminating against someone by prohibiting them, for example, from staying in your hotel because of their racial background or something like that. Typically, like I said, what the Human Rights Commission seeks to do is just to get people to stop the discriminatory behavior rather than seeking penalties.
And fun fact about Ways and Means jurisdiction, in case anyone didn't know, is we do not have jurisdiction over fines, just
Yeah.
policy committees have jurisdiction over fines.
So
Sometimes a fee is used as a penalty.
I know.
How do we distinguish between a fine and a penalty fee?
Fine line there. It's okay. Wow. I thought it was gonna get worse and worse. Okay, back to the
this is rougher than House General. That is usually uncentral. So no problem. So the last is just a study of potential changes to the Vermont Fire and Building Safety Code. The aim here is potential changes that could facilitate increased construction of new residential units, or conversion of existing space into new residential units or both. And then it could be incorporated, changes that could be incorporated into our fire and building safety code and including recommendations for any legislative action. So the goal here is really to address concerns that were raised about certain provisions of the fire and building safety code, making it difficult to develop housing. Obviously, the Division of Fire Safety, their first concern is preserving life safety. But this is asking them to look at other jurisdictions to see if there are any creative approaches being taken in other jurisdictions or innovative approaches being taken that might allow them to preserve life safety while also reducing the cost to build, for example, 4 or a 10-unit dwelling.
Would it be within our jurisdiction to change the date of that report?
Maybe.
I know you guys like December or earlier reports. Yeah, so this is a January 15th report in the second year of biennium.
Let's flag it to see if we have other.
That would be on brand though to change.
But we're not.
Yes, the report.
It's a little late in the year for such delightful shenanigans.
Who could do it? General?
No, I'm just, we will sort of figure something out.
Is it like if we're adding?
That's it.
If we're adding.
You guys are through my sections, so
Thank you, Amy.
short and sweet.
Yes.
Anything else you want to talk about while I'm here? Just kidding.
Have you seen Picard?
Yeah, I have not.
You have not?
No, I'm sorry.
This time of year.
Yeah, I have, well, yeah, I am busy and also, what is that on Paramount Plus or something? Yeah, we don't have that streaming membership. We try to limit our streaming services. So.
As you get older, you'll have them all. College, then you can afford it.
Yeah. We're pretty focused on Disney Plus right now for the kids, so, you know, yeah. The Star Wars, I'm getting caught up as I can.
Well, Picard in the beginning is pretty violent, so just kind of.
Yeah, it's not.
Noted. I gotta be honest, since Next Generation, I haven't been as avid a watcher. Not that I don't like it, but it's too much content for me.
So I think Pat's gonna.
Thanks, Pat. Just so you know, the subject is Star Trek in the context of housing. So good luck.
Oh. I guess you can take the chair.
We also have really good cookies.
Oh, I will take one of those if I'm
Yes.
allowed.
Yeah, they're from
No, I have
Terry. Please do.
Thank you.
So as the bill is divided between multiple attorneys, also divided between multiple fiscal staff. So that's good.
So I am Patrick Titterton. I am at the Joint Fiscal Office. I have been staffing the appropriations sections of this bill. So if you're really interested in the Act 250 or the designated areas portions of the bill, I might be somewhat frustrating to you all today.
We are gonna hear about those from Ellen and Dan at a later date.
Okay.
But I do believe Representative Sims might have questions.
As you walk us through, are you able to flag like what in the current version aligns with what's in the House and Senate budget? And what maybe where the bill is at odds?
You can say no, I didn't.
I didn't come fully prepared for that. I mean, what we could do, so no, I can't do the Senate side. And I can't, not right now, but we can certainly do that.
Not really our area. I'm just, if you know that this is very different than what we already passed.
From what you already passed on the House budget, you mean? Yeah, that'd be something I need to crosswalk with Sarah. She's the keeper of all the gold mine information.
Yes. And like, how does that all get reconciled? Like if, I mean, I guess our fees aren't in this case, trying to raise revenue to match programs. Maybe it doesn't matter here, but like.
Like how do the appropriations committees reconcile that? Some of it gets reconciled in conference.
And it's like,
Sometimes
will
we,
this come to the floor before, so like.
that all has to get figured out downstairs.
And doesn't really
Unfortunately,
affect
not really
our work.
Nope. Very grateful for that.
So maybe what I can provide before we get into the fiscal note is just, so this did start in Senate Economic Development and it included a whole raft of appropriations. Once that reached Senate appropriations, they pulled the appropriations out of the bill along with the accompanying language. So they could fit it within the budget that they were working on, in which they've just, I believe, Friday, released information on. I do think that there is a portion of it where, you know, we're looking at revenues coming in this month. It is an important month because this is when personal income taxes are due, right? So as they're constructing the budget and figuring out what can we fit within, you know, the construct of the money that we have coming in and what's available to us, there may be some discussions that are had around specifically appropriations that were pulled from bills into the budget and what they can fit into it, which is part of what makes it a little difficult to answer the question of what is in the Senate bill right now. It's something that's sort of an ongoing process that committee in particular is working through right now. But as it has come to you, you know, it is currently still in environment and energy. It's my understanding that they are the ones who are touching pieces on related to Act 250. House General did not touch those and decided to give it to their jurisdiction. But what is in here right now is this first bullet point that you see here. In sum, there are $115.35 million in appropriations. Those are all general fund appropriations. And I don't know, have you had a walkthrough with David on these sections?
Yes, David and Damien just know Ellen.
Okay.
Dan.
So.
We're fully prepared for you.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. So we can scroll down and we have to skip some of these sections with respect to Act 250, which at this point, as I said, may not be current anymore because those are being worked on. And I think the first section, which I think I walked in and Damien was talking about this, but this first section with an appropriation is section 25. There's $150,000 from the general fund to the Human Rights Commission, and that is for that litigator position. The next section with an appropriation is section 30. And there was $2.5 million to AHS. And that's to provide eviction rescue funding on behalf of tenants who are at risk of losing their housing. Section 31, there's $200,000 from the general fund to DHCD to expand home sharing opportunities in the state. Section 32 has a further $500,000 from the general fund also to DHCD. And this is to provide financial support for home repair, improvements, housing transition, and other types of eligible products for mobile homes and mobile home parks. And a lot of that work has to do with modernizing, the units themselves so that they are compliant, like HUD compliant. That is important when people want to finance purchases of homes like this, because some of those HUD requirements are required if you want to take out a loan for a mortgage to get one of these. And I think in particular with the platform improvements, those are a big thing for these types of homes. Section 34, that has a $2 million appropriation to VHFA. And this is for that first generation homebuyer program. This construct was first sort of introduced last year in S11 or Act 180 182, 183. And at that time, they enabled VHFA to leverage about $1 million in their first-time homebuyer program, which is a revolving loan fund. So because it's revolving, they send out the loans, they get repaid, and sort of would operate in perpetuity. At the time, it allowed up to 1 million of that to be used for these first generation homebuyer grants, which if it's going out as a grant, it's sort of exiting the revolving loan universe there. So potentially that could be viewed as a long-term sort of drag on that revolving loan fund. It just means less money is available to go out in these loans. So that's just a little history. The universe of people who qualify for this is, expected to be low. VHFA, because they don't ask for this information on mortgage applications, did not have precise data on it. But what they did have was from 2015 through March of 22, they had provided about $7.5 million in these loans to about 1,500 borrowers. So if we're thinking about first generation home buyers, we're talking about likely a small subset of this population of people. So since 2015, talking about 1,600 people. But in this bill, there's about $2 million that's being directed for this specific purpose, so that, we're not relying on the existing funds in this revolving loan fund. Section 37 appropriates $20 million from the general fund also to VHFA, and this is for the middle income home ownership development program. Section 39, there is $20 million also to VHFA for the rental housing revolving loan program.
We know how much is in these revolving loan funds now?
So this particular revolving loan program, I believe, is actually a new one. So this is sort of novel bespoke funding for a new program. So if this passes, it'd be $20 million.
What about the one previous?
I don't know if I have the information here now, but VHFA does publish annual reports that do give information on that. I believe when it was first enacted, they were expected to have funding available, which would get them through 2026. And last I spoke with Maura, they were still on track for that.
Can we maybe provide some additional funding in the BAA? Like for the missing middle homeownership program?
Yes, there was.
I think it was like 15 originally, and they received more applications than they had available funding. And so we added additional money in the BAA to cover that kind of first round of applicants. Get further down the list of applicants.
Yes, that's right. They have received a lot of applicants, and it's been generating a lot of interest. That's right. So we just touched on the revolving loan program. I trust David walked you through all the ins and outs of that. There's two more sections here. Section 41 has about $20 million for BHIP. This was a program that was first established last year in the same act. Maybe it's 182. But this is an existing program, again, generated a lot of interest. This year there's $20 million, which are being added to this program. I believe they were on track to expend the funds that they had received last year, but I can check and see if that is still accurate and get back to you on that piece. The last one here, which carries an appropriation, is Section 42, which is $50 million for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And this is to provide affordable mixed income rental housing and homeownership units. And One thing I can confirm for you, since the question was asked, as this came out of Senate Economic Development, and so before the appropriation was taken out and put into the big bill, that committee had passed this as a $25 million appropriation. So just highlighting that your House General, in adding extra funds, seemed to view some additional need or priority here. So those are the sections dealing with appropriations. I think I can talk a little bit about the other sections, but I think those are all subject to change right now.
And that is absolutely fine. We can tackle this tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's a lot of me talking about appropriations. There will be probably some things around Act 250, which you do have more direct jurisdiction over it as it relates to fee revenue. Again, sort of subject to what your committee before you decides to do.
Thank you. Any other questions, thoughts on this?
I just, back to some testimony that the Fire Marshal, Mike Jerosha, gave to us. Their budget, as you may recall, is driven by plan review. And I'm just trying to put together, if this has traction, may actually see some enlargement of the revenue to them from new development and projects that undergo plan review.
So it's a great question. So as the bill currently exists, again, subject to change, there are some exemptions that are made to Act 250 plan permits. So, you need to pay a fee for those permits. So there is a world where by creating these exemptions for Act 250, there could be some reductions in fee revenue. But again, I think he'd be best served by hearing Dan, who knows a heck of a lot more about Act 250 than I do. It's a very complex topic.
Fire marshal fees are separate from the 250 fees, but
so
anyway.
And I think he was Dan wasn't fire marshal fees. And you didn't do fire marshal fees.
It might be Ted. He's sort of our fee guy now.
But those are separate, those are building fees.
True.
Thank you so much. We are done for the day. We'll be back here tomorrow morning at 9. And that's it. Reminder again, Friday afternoon, we do have schedule at 4.